This is the last moment of Amy Winehouse. Before her story ended in silence, she had already sung the truth. But no one truly listened. In a world obsessed with glamour and tragedy, Amy became both muse and martyr. The voice that reignited soul music in the 21st century. The girl who said no, no, no to rehab. And the woman who turned heartbreak into melody found herself alone in her Camden home hours before the world lost her forever. She was just 27. But this is not just another tale of a gifted artist gone too soon. Amy's story is more chilling because it was written in her own lyrics, echoed in her public breakdowns, and screamed silently from every failed comeback. In her haunting track Back to Black, she didn't just speak of lost love. She foretold a retreat into the shadows. Her songs weren't metaphors. They were maps to a mind, unraveling. Behind the towering beehive hair and the Cleopatra eyeliner was a woman drowning emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Her voice carried the grit of jazz legends and the ache of someone who never truly left her teenage wounds. She wasn't just battling the media, addiction, or love. She was battling herself and losing in front of millions. In her final months, Amy tried to rise again. She canceled tours. She appeared on stage one last time, smiling beside her goddaughter. But something was broken. The sparkle that once lit arenas flickered behind clouded eyes. And then, the silence. No dramatic farewell. No final performance. No goodbye letter. Just a quiet flat in Camden. A body still. And the echo of a life that felt like a song abruptly cut mid-verse. But here's the truth that few talk about. Amy Winehouse didn't just die. She was already vanishing bit by bit with every ignored cry for help, every mocking headline, and every lyric that got danced to instead of understood. So today, we don't just revisit Amy's life. We trace the footprints left in her music, her interviews, her silences, and maybe just maybe discover the moment when everything shifted and no one noticed. To understand Amy Winehouse, we must first understand the world that shaped her and the world she would come to shake. The early 2000s music scene in the UK was dominated by polished pop, manufactured boy bands, and cookie-cutter girl groups. Authenticity was a rarity, and rawness was not profitable. Into this landscape walked Amy, a woman with a voice soaked in sorrow and smoke, with eyeliner thicker than the rules she broke, and with a soul carved from jazz and pain. She wasn't a product. She was a protest. Amy represented everything the mainstream wasn't ready for, but desperately needed. Her debut album, Frank 2003, introduced her as a jazz soul anomaly, sarcastic, sultry, and brutally honest. It was critically acclaimed, but not yet revolutionary. That would come later. What made Amy different wasn't just her sound, it was her substance. In an age where lyrics often said nothing, Amy's verses confessed everything. She wore her damage like a badge, her lovers like battle scars, and her addictions like shadows too loud to hide. By the time Back to Black dropped in 2006, and the world knew her name, but they didn't yet know the weight it carried. The album wasn't just successful, it was seismic. With Mark Ronson's retro soul production and Amy's devastating honesty, Back to Black wasn't just music, it was memory in motion. Songs like Rehab weren't fictional. They were headlines before the tabloids caught up. Love is a losing game wasn't poetry, it was prophecy. Back to Black wasn't just a breakup song, it was an emotional exodus. But while the world applauded her brilliance, they also consumed her breakdowns Paparazzi hounded her. Gossip columns ridiculed her. The media fed on her like vultures circling a storm. The same headlines that once crowned her the savior of British soul would soon mock her struggles with mental health and addiction. Behind every photo of Amy stumbling out of a club was a woman trying to find balance in a world that wanted her off-kilter. Behind every shaky live performance was a human unraveling under the weight of expectations, fame, and unresolved trauma. Her Camden neighborhood, once a vibrant haven for indie culture, became her prison. The very streets that witnessed her rise would soon cradle her collapse. Camden wasn't just where she lived. It was where her story folded inward. And amidst it all, the music never lied. Amy was always telling us what was happening. We just didn't listen hard enough. This is the setting of our story. A gifted artist in a culture obsessed with spectacle, a truth teller in an industry terrified of the truth, a broken heart turned into platinum records. Amy Winehouse wasn't just a singer, she was a symptom, a mirror, a warning. And as we move deeper into her story, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was a slow disappearance, laced into every lyric, every silence, every cry she sang through a microphone. What came next wasn't unexpected. It was foretold, in verse, in vinyl. In every time she whispered, "I go back to black." When Back to Black was released in 2006, Amy Winehouse became more than just a voice. She became a phenomenon. It was the perfect storm. Vintage soul reinvented for a modern age. Confessional lyrics that struck like daggers. And a woman who seemed to be both indestructible and made of glass. Critics hailed her as a genius. Fans saw themselves in her vulnerability. Industry executives saw dollar signs. But Amy saw none of that. What she saw was a whirlwind spinning faster than she could stand, and the ascent was quick, dizzying, and dangerous. With hits like Rehab, You Know I Am No Good, and Tears Dry on Their Own, Amy didn't just climb the charts, she redefined them. Awards followed Brits, Grammys, Ivor Novellos. She made history at the 2008 Grammys, becoming the first British woman to win 5 in one night. But even as she smiled through her satellite performance from London, unable to attend due to visa issues, the cracks were showing. Because Amy was never just rising, she was also falling. Every performance became a gamble. Some nights, she was radiant, soulful, precise, unforgettable. Other nights, she stumbled on stage, slurred lyrics, forgot cities. What the audience often dismissed as antics were symptoms of something deeper, unhealed trauma, untreated pain, and the crushing weight of a world that demanded brilliance, even as it ridiculed her for breaking behind the scenes. She was battling demons that had followed her for years. A turbulent romance with Blake Fielder, civil marked by chaos, codependency, and destructive habits became the muse for Back to Black. But this wasn't a fictional story of heartbreak. It was her real life, bleeding into her art. Friends and family worried. They spoke out. Her father, Mitch Winehouse, warned of her vulnerability. Her mother, Janice, quietly hoped fame would pass. But the machine didn't stop. Tours were booked. Press lined up. Everyone wanted a piece of Amy, but no one wanted to protect her. Tabloids loved her meltdowns. Paparazzi camped outside her home, chasing images of her barefoot in the streets or being helped into cars. She became a spectacle pop culture's favorite cautionary tale in real time. In 2007, she collapsed from exhaustion. Rehab stints came and went, some public, others secret. But recovery doesn't happen in the spotlight, and Amy's world had no shadows left to hide in. She tried. She canceled shows. She moved back in with family. She wrote new songs. She tried sobriety. She even smiled again, now and then. But every comeback attempt was met with relentless pressure. Every glimmer of recovery came with the question, when's the next album? When's the tour? She once told an interviewer, I am not trying to be a role model, I'm just a messed up girl making music. It was honest. Brutally so. Her inner circle grew smaller. Friends said she had good days. She laughed. She danced. She painted her nails. But bad days came in waves. Her body, already worn down by years of turmoil, began to carry the weight of more than just fame. She was thin, fatigued, often distant. Still, she insisted she was fine. She always insisted she was fine. In 2009, she took time off in St. Tay, Lucia, seeking peace. Writing, swimming. Locals said she smiled more there. But even paradise couldn't promise safety. Performances were uneven. Old habits resurfaced. The comeback record was delayed again and again. And yet, the world waited, impatient, demanding. Where's the Amy we fell in love with? But Amy never disappeared. She simply changed, or rather, she was changing, unfolding, reeling, resisting. In June 2011, Amy walked onto a stage in Belgrade to begin a European tour. It was supposed to mark her return, her redemption, but it was a disaster. She appeared dazed, confused, unable to perform. Fans booed, and footage went viral. The tour was canceled the next day. It would be the last time Amy Winehouse ever headlined a show. It wasn't just failure. It was heartbreak public, merciless, permanent. Less than a month later, Amy was gone. But here's what few noticed. Her breakdown wasn't confined to that final tour. It had started long before, slow, invisible, behind the scenes. Her collapse didn't come from one night of drinking or one bad review. It came from years of being expected to be extraordinary, without being allowed to be human. The world loved her voice but didn't want to hear her pain. They sang along to Rehab, but ignored its desperation. And they praised her lyrics, but punished her for living them. Amy Winehouse was a woman of contradictions. Fierce but fragile, gifted but haunted. And somewhere between the spotlight and the silence, she became a myth, a name in headlines, a punchline, a tragedy. But she was never just that. She was an artist whose wounds became art, whose voice shook rooms, and whose heart was too open for an industry that feeds on closed ones. Her ascent made history. Her breakdown made headlines. But her story, her real story, is found in the space between. And now, as we step into that silence, we must ask, when did the world stop listening? The story of Amy Winehouse did not end in one moment. It faded slowly, painfully in front of a world that kept watching but never truly saw. For years, the world mistook her pain for performance. They saw her trembling hands and thought it was part of the act. They heard her slurred words and assumed it was rebellion. They watched her unravel and called it entertainment. But behind the eyeliner, the beehive hair, the tattoos, and the biting sarcasm was a woman deeply unwell. And in her final months, the truth was no longer hiding, it was screaming. Her last tour, the one that began and ended in Belgrade, was not just a failure. It was a cry for help, one the industry wasn't equipped to answer. Witnesses said she looked confused, unsure where she was. She forgot lyrics, stumbled on stage, and at one point seemed to plead with the band to stop. Some fans booed, some cried, all left disturbed. But Amy had begged to cancel that tour. According to people close to her, she knew she wasn't ready. She had gone through a difficult stretch trying to stay sober, facing pressure from every side, and desperately wanting to be left alone. One friend said, she wasn't trying to be famous anymore. She was trying to survive. And yet, the machine kept turning. The show must go on. Even if the artist couldn't. After that disastrous night, Amy canceled the rest of her performances. She went home to Camden, and for a moment, it seemed like she might finally find peace. Her friends said she was laughing again. She was painting her nails, watching TV, even singing a little, but under that surface, the cracks remained. In her final days, Amy reportedly avoided alcohol for weeks before relapsing, just days before her passing. Her body, fragile from years of struggle, could not handle it. Medical reports later confirmed what many feared: the damage had been too much. The quiet flat in Camden became her final stage. There was no dramatic curtain fall, no grand finale, just silence. But silence can be deafening. When news broke of Amy's death on the 23rd of July, 2011, the world reacted with a mixture of shock and inevitability. Headlines read, "Gone too soon." Twitter exploded. Fans gathered outside her home, laying flowers and sobbing. Others mocked. The same tabloids that exploited her chaos now mourned her publicly. But the deeper question hung in the air like smoke. How did we let this happen? In the days following, uncomfortable truths began to surface. Her final blood alcohol level was 5 times the legal driving limit. There were no drugs in her system. No suicide note. Just absence. Some believed it was an accident. Others whispered darker theories. Her family pointed to her struggles with disordered eating and her weakened physical condition. Close friends hinted that Amy had long feared dying at 27, joining the so-called 27 Club of doomed musical legends. She once told her mother, "I am scared I am going to die young. Mum." But Amy didn't want to die. She wanted to stop hurting. In one of her last recordings, a duet with Tony Bennett titled Body and Soul, her voice is hauntingly soft, almost unsure. Bennett later said, she had so much to give, she just couldn't get it out anymore. It was the voice of someone who had been emptied by fame, by heartbreak, by pressure, and by a world that treated her fragility as a feature, not a flaw. Behind the music, the awards, the scandals, it was a human being, one who craved love, safety, simplicity. But that didn't fit the narrative. Amy wasn't allowed to just heal. She had to be wild. She had to be messy. She had to be Amy Winehouse, the brand. In the aftermath, her father founded the Amy Winehouse Foundation, aiming to help young people struggling with addiction and mental health. But it also raised questions. Could more have been done sooner by her team, by her label, by us? What's perhaps most tragic is that we did hear her, we just didn't listen. Her lyrics spelled it out. Her interviews begged for understanding. Her eyes tired. Distant told us everything we needed to know. But instead, and we danced to Rehab like it was an anthem. We quoted Back to Black without hearing the cry inside it. We praised her for being raw, while ignoring what that rawness cost her. This wasn't just the story of an artist gone too soon. It was a reflection of a system that chews up the vulnerable and spits them out, a media culture that feeds on pain, and an audience too often entertained by destruction. Amy Winehouse didn't just die in 2011. She faded for years on stages, in headlines, and behind closed doors. And the saddest part? It didn't have to end this way. When we look back at the life of Amy Winehouse, it's easy to get lost in the headlines, the paparazzi images, the late-night performances that went viral for all the wrong reasons. But beneath that, public chaos was a private story, one filled with complexity, contradiction, and quiet suffering. Was Amy a victim of fame? Was she failed by the people closest to her? Or was it something deeper, something inside her that no amount of love or success could reach? Perhaps it was all of it, or none of it. Because Amy's story doesn't fit into a single narrative. She was not just a talented singer. She was a composer of her own wounds. Every song was a piece of her raw, unpolished, honest to the point of pain. That honesty is what made her brilliant. And maybe, also, what made her vulnerable to the cruelty of an industry that rewards performance but punishes emotion. Her fans often say, "We failed her." But is that fair? Or is it just another way of distancing ourselves from a system we're all part of, one that celebrates the breakdowns, retweets the disasters, and waits for the next headline, like it's a TV show cliffhanger? We also must ask, where were the safety nets? Where were the mental health advocates? The protective contracts? The managers who said, "No, she's not ready"? Could her story have ended differently if the people around her had listened harder, or if the media had paused before publishing another sensationalized photo? If we, as a culture, had valued her as a human being, not just a source of content? These are questions with no easy answers. What we know is this: Amy Winehouse left a mark that can't be erased, not just in music, but in memory. She reminded us that talent doesn't make someone invincible, that charisma and charm can coexist with despair, that sometimes the loudest cry for help is sung through a microphone. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that she left us too soon, but that she warned us again and again. We just didn't listen. Now, it's your turn to think, what do you believe really happened to Amy Winehouse? Was her fall inevitable? Or was it preventable? Was she destroyed by others or by herself? And more importantly, what can we learn from her silence? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all. And sometimes, sharing your voice is how another voice gets saved. There are stories we hear, and then there are stories we feel. Amy Winehouse's life was never just about fame or music. It was about a voice aching, trembling, defiant, that echoed the parts of ourselves we often keep hidden. She didn't belong to the stage. She didn't belong to the press. She belonged to those quiet, late-night moments when a song plays, and we stop everything to listen. When a lyric cuts a little too close, when we whisper, "She gets it." Amy wasn't perfect. She didn't want to be. That's what made her real. She broke things. She loved deeply. She fell harder. And even in her silence, she said more than most people do with 1,000 words. She reminded us that you can be wildly talented and still wildly lost. That strength sometimes wears the face of weakness. That some of the most unforgettable legacies are built not from polished lives, but from imperfect truths. And that's why, even now, we still talk about her. not just because she sang, but because she bled through her music, because she dared to be messy in a world that demands perfection. Somewhere, in the echoes of Back to Black, in the defiance of rehab, in the tenderness of love, is a losing game. Amy is still with us, maybe not in body, but in feeling, in memory. In that quiet understanding between artist and listener, where no words are needed. There are stories that remain untold, but now you know one of them. And maybe the next time you hear her voice, you'll pause. You'll listen, and you'll remember not just how she sounded, but how she felt.